Hi, good afternoon to you all in this live panel on next generation water, wastewater, and sewage management. My name is Omar Saif. I'm a resilient, smart, and sustainable cities advisor with WSP, and I will be with the moderator for today's session. And I'm joined by three esteemed guests that we have with us today, including Mr. Sherif Sharobeem, who is the Deputy Director of Business Development at Orascom Construction. We also have with us Dr. Corrado Sommariva, who is the founder and CEO of SWPC in the UAE. And we are also joined by Mr. Nick Burnett, who is the head of wastewater and treatment at NEOM in Saudi Arabia. And just as a bit of context for today's panel and discussion, we know that both the MENA region and especially the Gulf, they are home to some of the most water-scarce countries on the planet, experiencing minimal rainfall, minimal surface water, and severely depleted or even over-abstracted aquifers. While desalination, which was covered in some of the previous panels, is no doubt an important supply-side solution, but with its high cost, energy intensive nature, and high carbon footprint, the real question is, should we not do more to ensure that we maximize the life cycle of each drop of water? And that's really the context for today's discussion, which is a very important topic and perhaps amongst the most critical for our region. So to our audience, please do share any comments or questions you have throughout the session. I'll be sharing them with our panelists throughout, and we will also have a question and answer period towards the end of the session. So with that, I would definitely like to kick it off and start today's discussion. Perhaps as a first question, what I would like to ask is to our esteemed guests is, where do we currently stand within MENA with respect to wastewater collection, treatment, and reuse? And are we doing enough on this matter? So perhaps I can start with Dr. Corrado and Nick with respect to the Gulf region, and Mr. Sherif, maybe you can talk a little bit about Egypt and your experience there as well.
Thank you very much, Omar, for the questions. I believe that today wastewater treatment processing in the GCC are basically based on oxidations. The more wastewater is oxidized, the more the carbon dioxide is emitted, and therefore the potential for energy recovery from the wastewater treatment stream is gone. At the moment, the wastewater is seen as something to get rid of at the lowest possible cost and with least implication for reuse and energy recovery. But if we really apply a sustainable concept, which is a cradle-to-cradle approach, then wastewater can be upcycled to fresh water, and the energy which is in the wastewater in terms of BOD and COD can be recovered rather than dissipated. So basically, and along with that, a lot of nutrients and resources. This concept is applied in Europe, whereby wastewater treatment plants are not wastewater treatment plants, are energy generation plant where produce biogas and are carbon negative, and are also nutrient treatment plants where struvite, for instance, is produced in many plants in Europe. We are still far away in the Middle East from this concept, and I believe that it would be a challenge to introduce it, a positive, complete cradle-to-cradle cycle in the future.
Just thank you for that, Dr. Corrado. And before I move on to Mr. Sherif, just as a quick follow-up, definitely you're talking with respect to the treatment technologies and more of the economics around wastewater treatment and how you can extract, whether it's energy, nutrients, and such. But with respect to the infrastructure itself, whether it's the collection system, the actual sewage treatment systems, do you have any comments on that, particularly for the Gulf region?
Generally, both in the UAE, the collection system is basically reaching everyone. Saudi Arabia is now striving towards an overall collections. I don't believe it is a major challenge for the sector to widen the collections and the network in the collections. I think that the main challenge is really what to do with the sewage once reclaimed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Nick, I see that you're also with us now. Just to reiterate the question, we were talking about the current state of wastewater collection and treatment and reuse in the MENA region, and just curious to hear your thoughts on the grounds in Saudi Arabia. Where do you see that? How do you see the current situation?
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, the current situation is very interesting. Coming from NEOM, it's we're obviously a greenfield situation, so it's very different to the remainder of the kingdom. But what I do see is that there is change afoot. We're pioneering in NEOM in terms of biosolids, and I see a lot of traction as well from other elements of NWC in terms of biosolids. So I think if we go into biosolids treatment, there's going to be a big change in the next 5 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you, Nick. And Mr. Sherif, the MENA is a big region, so we're talking a little bit about the Gulf, but we'd love to hear your thoughts as well about Egypt.
Okay, thank you everyone for this. For Egypt, Egypt have been working along since long time in building several wastewater treatment plant and focusing on collection and working to reuse the wastewater for agriculture purposes. And let's say since 11 years, they have boomed with major wastewater plants here, ranging from 200 to 250,000 to up to 1.5 million or more. So in Egypt, here is a great focus on building wastewater treatment plants, reusing the water in agriculture purposes.
Great. No, thank you, Sharif. And just before we move on to the next topic, I would like to raise the issue of cost. So the cost of water itself in terms of how it's accounted as wastewater versus, whether it's desalinated or fresh water or, coming from the Nile in your case, Sharif. Do any of you have any comments on this in terms of the actual costing of water? Is it performed adequately currently, or is there some kind of tariff reform that is required to also include and encapsulate wastewater as well?
In Egypt-wise, there is the tariff for drinking water is there. It's being reformed now. For wastewater is considered among the water business, so it's bundled in, so you cannot get it segregated. But however, I get the tariff is in adequate level. Now in desalination, this is a different story because basically previous projects were in EPC basis. Now the government is having a big initiative to go for around 3 million meter cube of desalinated plants, and these will be with the tariff. But this is still the plan, but it's yet to come.
Thank you, Sharif.
Yes, certainly what we're doing in NEOM is we are introducing a tariff for TSE, and it'll be competitive, and it'll be set at a level that encourages developers to use TSE rather than drawing additional desalinated water out to, for simple tasks like irrigation, construction water. So we're in the process of developing a tariff structure for that.
Yeah, this is a main paradox, in fact, Omar. If you see, I would say 80% of the water consumption is typically non-domestic. So it goes for irrigation, it goes for landscaping and industrial use. And therefore, TAC reclaim could be a perfect use, whereas in the GCC, often we use desalinated water, which is more expensive and more energy intensive as opposite to wastewater reuse. So again, as Nick correctly mentioned, the objective of putting a value to the TAC, but also to the sludge, would not only contribute to get incentive for beneficial use, but will reduce the overall tariff of wastewater treatment in the taxpayers. So that's, I believe, it's next challenge for the future.
And you're touching on, I think, exactly the next topic that I wanted to transition to, and that's the role of wastewater as it relates to the water, energy, and food nexus. So really, how does it relate to each one of those areas? And as we were just mentioning, I think one of the typical applications of treated wastewater when we discuss it is talking about landscaping or agriculture. And maybe I can direct this question to Mr. Sherif. Could you elaborate on this from your experience of treated wastewater or TSE for agricultural applications?
Yeah, okay. Most of the, or all, let's say, most of the plants here in Egypt on wastewater, the outcome is used for agriculture. The treatment plants here in Egypt is a mixture between secondary and tertiary treatment. So
Hmm.
you make further enhancement. This can reach even a drinkable water for human beings. But however, according to the regulation, no, it's used only for agriculture, animal use, or whatever. And according to the type of crops, this water is limited to use. Recently, we were involved in building a 5 million meter cube per day to treat agriculture water for recycling. And also, there is another plant now under construction. It's a 6 million meter cube per day. It will collect the water coming from agriculture and recycle it to reuse it again. So, because this water can be used for all types of agriculture, but for the water coming out of wastewater is limited for some given crops, not for everything. So all the plan here in Egypt is focusing on agriculture, on using that in irrigation, and even in new compounds and new cities. That now the law and regulations prohibit to use desalinated water or potable water for irrigation. You need to reuse the waste and get out of it. And now also they are moving to the trend to push more on energy efficient solutions.
Hmm. And Dr. Corrado and Nick, how do you compare that with the experience here in the Gulf region in terms of the utilization of wastewater, where traditionally it's been done more so for landscaping? How do you compare it with, the experience of that Sherif is sharing in Egypt?
Shall I go first, Nick, or
Yeah.
you want to?
Please, yeah.
Yeah, I think that is something that the governments in all the GCC are strongly committed to implement against skepticism, initial skepticism that has been lasting for a couple of decades. I can see now, for instance, Saudi Water Partnership Corporate Company has introduced already since a couple of years, 5 years actually, in all their PPP schemes for ISTP, a beneficial use of TAC and of the sludge. And I believe this is the right path to start really a dramatic change in the reuse of STP. At the moment, this is only for landscaping and irrigation and industrial use. Does not yet include aspects that are related to the food cycle, but possibly this is going to change in the future. Paradoxically, I was coming and I was working on a project in Jordan where farmers were complaining after the water was shifted from treated STP to desalinated water, because they had to buy much more fertilizers and the water was poor in nitrogen and phosphorus. So I believe here there is a lot of potential to be exploited, because even if we can differentiate the use of water, and we can take maximum benefits and even optimize the treatment system. So, but we are on the right path. I think the government are strongly, and public corporations in the GCC are strongly supporting this mechanism. Yeah.
And that's something we're very supportive of in NEOM as well. We are looking at, our treatment assets will be designed to, produce a TSE that can be used for, for agricultural purposes. And we're looking at opportunities for biosolids. I keep jumping to biosolids, but it's something that we're planning here that's going to be very, very different. So we do plan to reuse our biosolids as well. So we'll be harvesting energy in the form of biogas, and we'll be also using the residual products to support our development of land remediation and agriculture in the form of fertilizer product. So this, we're it's a little bit different here. We're not going to have the same laws as KSA, so we do have a chance to influence the regulations.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps we have a chance, and more of a chance. We don't have such a legacy, if you like, that we have to kind of go against. So, which
is quite exciting and quite a lot of pressure, I imagine, right? You're in a sense leading the regulation, possibly of an entire country.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, and so I think now we were talking in the region, yeah. No, so thank you all for this point. I think really the utilization of TSE for agriculture, especially given the push towards greater food security over the past few years, and as we saw also with the pandemic, the need for the localization of certain key sectors, or at least to certain extents, it's really really important. So beyond the, I think, regulatory or perhaps the cultural shift in mindset of accepting TSE towards agricultural use, what do you see is needed also from an infrastructural point of view, in terms of the actual distribution networks of treated wastewater? We have a common statistic, I think, in many GCC countries where even if the collection rates are 100% or the treatment is at 100%, you have in some cases 50% of it being rejected back into the sea, of perfectly good water that could be used for agriculture or landscaping or whatever it may be. So where do you see what needs to be done to really bring that percentage upwards to 100% recycled water?
Shall I go first?
Yes, please go ahead, Doctor.
But you can see in all the GCC and even in the UAE, a lot of wastewater is sold at the tanker points. So this is extremely unsustainable from the energy point of view and very, very bad from the environment. There is no separate distribution network for the TAC. Therefore, the easiest thing to do is simply dump it, dump the excess into the sea, and not really, or really only recently we have incentives to make beneficial use of this TSE, and this paradoxically creates a vicious cycle, because let me take it from the desalination point of view. If you discharge nutrients into the sea, the nutrients generates red tide. So we are spending money to protect ourselves from the damage that we can do by dumping the TSE, rather than utilizing TSE beneficially and saving money in the construction of very large, expensive dissolved air flotation that are constructed just because we are eutrophicating our waters by dumping a lot of treated sewage effluent. So turning this vicious cycle into a positive cycle, virtuous cycle, is possible, is in reach actually. It is possible by simply incentivizing and get to zero overflowing of TSE. And one of the first objective to achieve that objective, in my opinion, is really get rid of the tanker points and build up a strong and resilient network which can be made available to farmers and utilities. Possibly even at the battery limits of a quarter, you could have a connection of potable water and a connection with sewage water, and you can use that sewage water for all the non-domestic use.
That's a really great point you raised about the paradoxical nature of the link with the red tide. So no, thank you for sharing that. And Nick, is there anything you wanted to talk about this, especially with NEOM being a greenfield development, a lot that can be done at an early stage?
Absolutely, and I guess it's a little bit easier for us because we are, in that, we can plan. We have a greenfield. We can, we can use the lessons learned and work from that. So our plans are that we will have distribution networks. We're going away from the tank and fill points, as Dr. Corrado said. So distribution networks. We're trying to understand our demand as well. If we don't understand the demand of and the quality of the TSE required, then you could end up producing a surplus of quality that nobody wants. So I think it's really critical that we understand our demand profiles in terms of quality and flow. And that's, we have industrial cities planned within NEOM, and, we'll be looking to have a different main treatment process to produce a processed water, if you like, that will be in demand. I think Dr. Corrado kind of talked about, the differences between desal water and TSE. If we think about tariffs as well, we've got to incentivize it, right? We've got to really, goes back to our previous discussion, but we have to really incentivize the use of TSE, and either that's via KPIs with contractors or it's via tariffs to the consumer. So that's really our strategy.
That's a great point, also about really providing the right incentive schemes and nudges towards the actual utilization of the treated wastewater. So thank you all on this, and I would like to kind of, as an expansion of our discussion on the links with the whole water, energy, and food nexus, is to also look at the energy component. We know that a number of countries in the region, including the UAE and KSA, have established net zero targets. And what I would like to know from you is how does wastewater fit into it, and what's the connection with GHG emissions? So we've already alluded to this, of course, with some of the discussion around desalination and such, but how can reform or next-gen water treatment also help us achieve these net zero targets? And perhaps here I can start with, I'll continue with Nick, and then Dr. Corrado and Sherif.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways, in the traditional form of wastewater treatment is to collect the wastewater, pump to a distant treatment plant, and then pump it back for either disposal or recycling. What we're trying to do is to integrate our facilities, within the community. So removing away all that infrastructure cost and carbon footprint associated with an infrastructure network and pumping stations to remote big central facilities to decentralized plants that are going to take away all that, infrastructure and the such like required. So localized treatment, I think would be a very, very, quite a shift away from the conventional approach, and that's something we're considering heavily in NEOM. So on the line, rather than having one big facility that's going to serve the whole line, integrate, otherwise you will end up, it's a lot of transferring of either sewage and/or TSE. So we can make this localized to demand centers, then you remove all that cost and energy. Mm-hmm. So that's one simple way that we're considering our to minimize our energy requirements.
Yeah.
But I think you also refer to the desal part component of the water, which is quite energy intensive, is it, Omar?
Yes, correct.
And I believe that achieving a zero net carbon from desalination is also essential to reach net zero in 2050. I believe this is one of the most important goals, and I believe the goal is in reach because if you see in all GCC, solar farms are basically sprouting more and more anywhere, and the power that is generated from the solar farms gets priority into the feed into the grid. For at least 6 hours a day, a PV system gives a tariff which is as low as 1 cent per kilowatt hour, so below any other possible tariff, but it's only for 6 hours a day. the desalination now are operating like still the old thermal desalination plants. So when the power plant works, the steam was coming to the desalination plant, so the desalination plant also work. But with reverse osmosis technology, we can basically decouple from this concept. We can run a reverse osmosis plant when extra energy is available, and shut it down or curtail its productions where there is no energy available. So we could run a desalination plant for 6 to 8 hours a day, store the water, and then and with this 6 hour day we could run it with renewable energy, store the water, and then basically use the water storage as a buffer for energy and reduce and control the peak load by storing water and curtailing the desalination production. So in this way, if we can move away from the steady way of production generations of the desalination system, a desalination could be seen as an indirect battery storage, because it doesn't do anything else than converting energy into chemical energy by converting seawater into potable water. So I believe that when we are working on this one and decreasing the energy consumption, again, energy intensity of the desalination plants from 3 up to 2.5, 2, which is in reach, then it would be really possible to have a zero net diesel system. And by the way, the same thing is applicable to wastewater treatment system. We don't need to treat wastewater treatment system continuously. We could buffer them and then treat them when we have solar energy available. And then we can recover energy from wastewater treatment, turning all this negative CO2 into a positive CO2 cycle instead.
Thank you, Dr. Corrado. And I'm also curious to hear from you, Sherif, in terms of the application of renewables, or possibly also the using sludge towards biogas. What sort of solutions do you see for really reducing the energy and emissions footprint of wastewater treatment?
Okay. One of the major projects here in Egypt, it's called Jabal Asfar wastewater treatment plant. It's almost 2.5 million meter cube per day. They are already using biomass, using the sludge to produce biomass, which is consumed by the plant itself. And also to add to Dr. Corrado what he have mentioned, that now the initiative to go for the 3 million desalination plants coupled with PV, coupled with solar. So this can reduce the carbon emissions and become more environmental friendly. And as correctly mentioned, the more environmental or renewable energy source coupled with the project, this make it more attractive for financing, especially under the guidelines that now being applied all over the world.
Okay, that's a really interesting point. Maybe we can just focus a little bit more on this, which is the financing aspect of it. How do you see the actual forecast for investment in treated wastewater projects within the MENA region? Is it an area that's experiencing a lot of investment? And maybe we could look at it both from a Gulf perspective and also the broader MENA region. Sherif, how do you see it in Egypt at the moment?
See, in Egypt, we were involved in the first two PPPs in wastewater, and they were attractive. And we were the one awarded the first ISPT in Dammam in Saudi. I think the market still be attractive, especially in desalination, because this is a trend that's coming here. I guess in the DGC, the problem is now that after the recent plans that have been tendered and awarded, the tariffs are very, very low side, and this impacts the return on investment, which is also on the low side. That's why I this is also what we have been watching, the trend that people tend to be a little bit cautious now and going on PPPs in the MENA region, especially because now as the benchmark is in the very low side, so this means the returns are very low. Everything is optimized, so the margins are very thin. So it depends on the portfolio of the investor who's looking on these projects.
Omar, you are mute.
Ah, okay, sorry. Sorry about that. No, I was just asking Nick, how do you also see this in Saudi Arabia in terms of the investment? I mean, we know that there's a lot of projects undergoing both in NEOM and outside of NEOM. How much of a priority our wastewater treatment projects at the moment?
We know ourselves that the fantastic work that SWPC are doing. The amount of contracts that are awarded, it's incredible. So they are attracting a huge amount of interest, but as Sherif says, the price is getting ever lower. And for me in NEOM, I think we're trying to encourage innovation, and I think if we see this downward trend of cost per cubic meter, we're really going to discourage innovation, because we're not going to get the latest technologies. We're going to get the technologies that can produce the lowest price, right? So it's a real challenge for us. So we're looking to try and capture innovation within a PPP is going to be a real challenge for us. So we have our initial plants we will be doing on conventional EPC, but in the future we're looking to work towards some kind of model that's going to incentivize innovation through PPP. Because if we don't do that, we're not going to end up with advancements. We're going to end up with the same technologies we've always had, and we're not going to achieve our carbon targets by getting these type of technologies. So we have to change that mindset to get the innovation that we want.
Okay, and Dr. Corrado, what's your experience within this?
I agree with Nick, and it is important to notice that even during COVID, when the overall economy was shut down, Saudi Water Partnership Company has issued several, at least, projects with ISTP and managed to successfully financially close. So means that coming back to your questions on investments are there. There is a potential to do them and to do them economically. But again, at the moment, the only quantifiable criteria is tariff. And unless we put some other criteria, which is environmental friendliness, CO2 footprint, and other paradigms, which is involving the beneficial use of sludge, it is difficult to change the current state of technology. As I mentioned, at the moment, all the technologies are based on oxidations. So it is. I participated at the conference, say, wastewater treatment system, 2 centuries of oxidations, basically. Whereas there are more technology, which are membrane-based, where the carbon is left in the sludge, and the sludge are left to produce energy or to produce nutrients or to enrich the soil. So if we don't find a way to encourage these alternative technologies, there's no chance that this can prevail in the future.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Corrado, you always seem to allude to the next question that I have, so thank you for that. And that's really about the next gen technologies. So we've alluded to some of them a little bit, and we've discussed them in a little bit. But I'd like to hear from all of you, from your own experience and your industry experience. What sort of technologies and innovations do we see in this space? Whether it's from the collection systems to the actual treatment, maybe in terms of the applications. What sort of trends and technologies do you see existing? And maybe I would also like to start off, because this is quite a broad question. I would like to have a bit of a debate around the between the centralized and decentralized wastewater treatment, because we do see a lot of companies entering the space and offering it at a either a community level or even at a household level. So, what are your thoughts on that? Is there a balance between centralized and decentralized, and where do we apply uh, those technologies? Nick, maybe I can start with you because I know that this is something NEOM is actively looking into.
It is, yeah. I mean, we have an innovation stream, as part of our wastewater department, where we're trying to keep abreast, but it's a very, very wide topic. I think rather than going into technology innovation, we're looking at innovations as you touched upon in terms of application. So we're looking to I think the way that we're treating biosolids is very different to the rest of the GCC. So we really are seeing this as a resource, So we have I don't know if we can go into too many details, but we have plans for a biosolids hub in NEOM that's going to go to tender very, very shortly.
Yeah, you've mentioned biosolids a few times, so no, feel free to
Yeah,
elaborate a little bit on it.
I'm passionate about it because from what I've seen, it's we waste that resource. So we're
Too
going to
right.
so we're going to be looking at that. We're looking at struvite recovery, for example. We're looking at the Ostara process in terms of recovering phosphorus. We're looking at N removal technologies. And the plan that I was kind of alluding to is we'll be removing gas, generating gas, converting to energy. So it's going to be a regional centre. So it will be actually energy positive. We've done our calculations, and there'll be sufficient biosolids coming in to sustain the process with the potential for export energy. So the innovations can, the applications. I think that's changing that mindset is a massive thing, So if we can actually apply our biosolids to lands, not only are we, not landfilling biosolids to the desert, but we've got a revenue stream as well. So it's really
Yeah.
changing this mindset is huge. As I say, we're kind of lucky in NEOM that we can influence the regulator maybe a little bit more than in other countries, but it's still going to be a challenge. You also talked about centralized versus decentralized. I think generally we're going to end up with the NEOM geography is such that we're not going to end up with one or two mega plants. So we're going to have to look at decentralized systems as well. We're trying to we don't want to end up with a legacy of big plants. So we're trying to bring our plants closer. As I think I touched on this earlier, bring our plants closer to the communities. We want to make these plants, for example, we're looking at an FCR process for one of our communities. Excuse me, and we can educate the public, right? We can integrate these facilities into the community. We can turn them into cafeterias. We can turn them into education centres, and people can use these facilities rather than being an asset that nobody wants to go anywhere near. Let's encourage the interaction. Let's encourage people to come and see these, because it's very, very important that because if we don't have that change and kind of shift of perception, then it's never going to change in terms of what people will or won't see.
Yeah.
We have to integrate this, and that's going to help change the mindset as well.
Thank you, Nick. And maybe Sherif, you'd like to go next and just tell us maybe some of the innovations and also your view on centralization versus decentralized treatment.
Basically, here in Egypt, because of the population and the big footprint of the country, Egypt tend to do large desalination plants and large wastewater treatment plants. As I told you, we've just been awarded the North Coast 6 million meter cube of water treatment for irrigated water. So because of the extensive development now to new cities around all over Egypt, so the government is focusing on building huge ones to be the center. Then to go as the line progress and the population increase, for the smaller plants on the way. But basically, they start with a big one. So now the city is safe, at safeguard. Then they go into the inter parts of the country to make, or this location to make smaller ones. Innovation, as I told you, now the trend is to couple everything with renewable sources. And because of Egypt now have excess power, they want to reduce the emissions. They want to make it more sustainable. So this is just to answer, but here's the mixture. Basically, we go for big sizes, then small sizes, because of the big footprint and the huge population. We are almost at 100 million inhabitants here in Egypt.
Yeah. And you mentioned also some of the rural communities. I mean, do we see a parallel with also power grids where, where you have more grid access, then naturally you might have larger
Yes,
utility scale projects and then, captive generation or for the more off-grid locations?
yes. Basically, for example, all the coastal area, they were asked to make their own desalination plant, they make their own captive power from renewables. So this is one. And as the city grows and the new urbans are growing, the country is extending its grid lines and also extending the grid lines to neighboring countries.
Hmm.
So this is how we're expanding here in Egypt. There has been a great shift over the last 7 years here. Out of development that happened, and a lot of sustainable towards in the water and power system.
No, thank you, Sherif. And Dr. Corrado.
Well, I am a great advocate of the decentralizations. I think we started decentralizations here in the UAE 20 years ago when we started the Palm Jumeirah system, which seven MIGD that seawater RO that were looking like a shopping mall basically with RO system based on three floors. Up is RO, middle floor is pretreatment, and lower floor is the storage tank. And you, as Nick mentioned, you don't believe that close by there is a Sofitel. You don't believe this is a desalination plant. It costs a little bit more, but you save money on the transmission and distribution. And what it is more important is that gives value to the land. If you are here in the UAE and you go to the Atlantis, for instance, you go and you sit and having a coffee, and on your left-hand side, you see 12 kilometers of desalination plants occupying the coastline. Imagine if these desalination plants could be embedded in small regional district system, and then the power plant could be shifted inland and be sustainable. That 12 kilometers of coastline could be dedicated to villas, residential parks, agriculture, if you like. But anyhow, whatever it can be done. I mean, embedding the desalination and the wastewater treatment into the urban districts is something that makes a lot of sense. And here, maybe I believe there are two words, the words of engineers and desalinators and wastewater treatment, which are simply the industry, and the words of the planners and the words of the architects. They don't talk to each other. And if we could simply talk to each other, we can find a framework where we can talk to each other and optimize a lot of actual residential solutions could be really optimized.
No, I think that's a great point you mentioned, especially for the reduction in costs on transmission and the distribution of the actual water, especially in maybe countries where they do have issues with the maintenance of those systems. That's a significant loss in water. So to bring the treatment closer to the source, even if the system is a little bit more expensive, it might be justified in the future losses from the system.
And from the strategic point of view, imagine that if you are in Riyadh, you depend on two main pipelines coming from Jubail and Al Khobar. Whereas the more you can reclaim locally, and the more you can do close to the source, the better, the lower is your resilience on transmission pipeline that often have the same energy footprint than the generation pipeline.
Yeah.
And here I think we should also spend a few minutes to discuss the idea of the impact of reclaiming. If you are in certain areas in the GCC, for instance, if you are in places in the mountains like Abha in Saudi Arabia, which is 2,000 meters, you pump water 2,000 meters from the coast from the desalination plants in Shukaik, it takes 20 kilowatt hour per meter cube to pump the water from Shukaik to Abha. Any cubic meter of wastewater that you reclaim in Abha would save not only the generation, but also the transmission. So in implementing a wise wastewater system recovery and reclamation would be essential also for the footprint control or the footprint greenhouse gas emissions.
Mm-hmm. And yes, okay. So that's we delved quite a bit into the topic of centralized versus decentralized. Just going back to the broader topic of innovations that we see in the next gen water. You also mentioned biosolids, Nick. What other areas do we see that there are innovations in that we should be heading towards, especially if the regulation allows, the PPP structures allow, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I started off my career in innovation 20 odd years ago, and we were looking very much at anaerobic, mainstream anaerobic treatment, and it still doesn't feature that highly. I still think I still think there's work that can be done there. So it's something that we are looking at in terms of mainstream, either mainstream anamox or mainstream anaerobic processes. I'm trying to get out of the biosolids space at the moment. So on the liquid stream, there's many, there's many technologies out there. But what we're trying to do in NEOM is not just innovate for innovation's sake. We want to make sure that we innovate aligned to to our strategies. So we're in the process. We just commissioned our innovation strategy, and we're as a part of this biosolids plant that I mentioned, we're planning 8 pilot beds to be installed alongside the biosolids facility. So we are encouraging partnerships. We're talking with universities and suppliers, trying to to find out what the next gen technologies are, and giving people a platform to innovate and test the technologies within NEOM. Mm-hmm. So we are addressing it. But to answer your question, I guess really it's mainstream anaerobic and mainstream anamox would be my would be my next kind of target.
Okay. No, thanks for sharing. And Sherif?
As I told you, now the focus here is to minimize the consumption of electricity and emissions. So for Egypt, they are opening for new innovations and new technologies. The problem is because these plants are huge in size, so you cannot use them as a pilot plant. So we're just looking for a proven technology that have been working, but you cannot go on a trial on a 5 million or a 6 million meter cube per day.
Mm-hmm. Understood. And Dr. Corrado?
Yeah, innovation is very important, but for large plants, the worst enemy of innovations are the lenders, the banks. They want to proven processes. So it's really, we have to gain momentum to give innovative technology a niche market whereby they can compete among themselves and then develop and grow. And this is the challenge for the future, in the sense that innovation can be fostered and can be incentivized if the real industrial targets are. Otherwise, the academy will simply produce endless number of academic papers without a real innovation. Mm-hmm. Desalination systems have been innovating and decreasing technology energy footprint from 4 kilowatt hour per meter cube to 3 kilowatt hour per meter cube simply by practice. these are not the breakthrough innovations of a new process, of a new breakthrough equipment. It's only good practice and shaving energy cost when it is possible by increasing efficiency of the pump, efficiency configurations, and getting rid of all the tinsels that typical old-fashioned specification were forecasting. Now it is important that this is continued and implemented in real plants, like for instance the NEOM plant, where there is real desalination, which has a new concept of application and with zero liquid discharge, and these plants are relatively small but are milestone, and this will set up a pace for the industry to follow.
Wonderful. My last question to all of you gentlemen, because we are approaching the end of this panel, is we mentioned a little bit the idea of enabling regulations or things that can further support innovation or the adoption of new technologies. If you a little bit of a scenario that we can develop, if you're a regulator and you have the opportunity to change one particular piece of regulation for supporting advancements in treated wastewater projects, or it could even be in terms of the contracts, something related to the contracts, what would you change? And I won't put anyone on the spot. Whoever wants to go first, feel free to.
I think it's Nick. You are the first one, in my opinion, the best qualified to answer this question.
I think as we touched a couple of times, so maybe it's a nice closing message. Is that it's encouraging innovation or incentivizing innovation or getting away from the lowest price, that mentality, that the lowest price per cubic meter. So we really we need to be kind of broadening our horizons in terms of evaluation and contract award, but it's a huge shift. It's a huge shift. Not only do I preach it to the contractors, but it's stemmed into the procurement through contracts. It's endemic through the whole kind of supply chain. So to try and get away from that and to incentivize either on innovation or environmental performance, as Dr. Corrado said earlier, would be something I would love to see a shift in. And it's something we're going to be looking. There are models out there, but they're not based on like private finance. It's all based on EPC. There's some amazing work being done in Scandinavia. They have an innovation type contract merged with an EPC. So it's something we're looking at, and if we can develop it one stage further into financing as well, then it would be a truly huge shift.
Okay, great.
I wish Nick is right. That I think in our part of the world we need rules, and I think a good example was given by Saudi Water Partnership Corporation when they say we will not accept bid in IWPs from desalination plants unless the seawater energy consumption is below 3.5 kilowatt hour per meter cube. Believe me, this was quite a breakthrough, because everybody was 4 kilowatt hour per meter cube and say, no, we're not ready. Masdar did a pilot plant, demonstrated 3.2, 3.5, but yes, but this is only pilot plant. Well, the Saudi Water Partnership Company stick to that number, and they got bids that were below 3.5 and 3.2, between 3.5 and 3.2. And now, 3 years after, anything that is above 3.5 or in the range of 3.5 to 3.2 kilowatt hour per meter cube is laughable. So maybe, and I'm just throwing a stone in the pond, the next tender could be, we want a desalination plant for wastewater treatment plant with zero net energy carbon. And the industry will follow suit. I'm sure the industry has the tools to do it at a lower cost, because the reduction in energy consumption came also with reductions in the tariff. So if the incentive and as Nick said, but also if the guidelines are right, the industry doesn't have problems to follow them.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point, Dr. Corrado, and definitely having these kinds of targets. Yeah, you're right. It's definitely supports it. Sherif, last but not least, what would your suggestion be?
See, I think putting a clear direction for the government or the entity helps achieving these goals. As correctly said, when you put the limitation on the consumption, this encourage more innovation and more optimization. However, moving in this direction, sometimes you are challenged that you need to get a new items that little bit expensive in the capex, but on the long run it's better. And this is the dilemma that your tariff will be high, and you cannot either reduce. This will come by time, but you cannot at the same time reduce consumption and reduce the price, because to get a better brand that consumes less energy, it's an expensive brand, because this brand, the
Hmm.
capital in the initial is cost saving. It tells you on the lifetime you will save, but now you need to pay for it. So this is a little bit challenging in optimizing and getting new trends in the business.
No, wonderful. Thank you, Sherif. And since we have just another minute or so, I will also share my own thing that I would like to change, especially for the Gulf region. And we talked earlier about really providing the incentives for to recycle and to actually utilize wastewater. For me, one of the challenges I've seen is particularly in the agricultural sector, which is a major consumer of water in the Gulf and globally, is how little regulated the groundwater abstraction is, whether it's in terms of cost or in terms of quotas or even the crops that are being selected. Definitely advancements have been made. For me, I would like to see some kind of pricing put on groundwater abstraction and metering. I think doing something of that sort to protect the aquifers would really incentivize greater uptake and usage of TSE. So that would be the one thing I would like to change.
That's something we are looking at. We are prohibiting groundwater abstraction in NEOM, so
Hmm.
everything from desal, as you said, with full emphasis on utilization of TSE.
Yeah.
So I agree there, Omar.
Good. So my dream's been accomplished. Thanks. Thanks, Nick. All right. With that, then I want to thank you, gentlemen, so much for the lively discussion. I've learned a lot from all of you. If you have any last words you would like to say before we close the session, please feel free to.
So thank you. It was very fruitful.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Omar. Thank you.
No, thank you all so much, and thank you to MEED also for giving us this platform. And wish you all the very best, and have a great day.
Thank you.